Never underestimate how fast a regular day can turn into something you'd never forget. Imagine this. You're walking home from the grocery store, your hands full of bags, thinking about dinner. Nothing unusual. But out of nowhere, a kid you barely know demands you hand over some of your food. You refuse, of course, you just paid for it. But then his mother storms out, furious, accusing you of being the problem. She calls the cops on you, confident she's in control. What she doesn't know is that you're not just some random neighbor. You're the police commander. And when the truth comes out, the whole situation flips upside down. This isn't just one of those viral clips about a Karen. This story hits deeper because it exposes how entitlement and prejudice can turn everyday life into a dangerous trap. And the irony here, the very system she thought would protect her ends up exposing her own bias instead. This story starts in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where lawns are manicured, neighbors wave to each other, and the HOA, the Homeowners Association, thinks it runs the show. But under that calm surface, tension is always waiting to boil over. On this particular day, a woman we'll call Linda decided to pick the wrong target. Her son demanded groceries from a black man named Commander Davis. And when Davis refused, Linda decided to call the cops. She thought she was teaching him a lesson. Instead, she was about to get the shock of her life. If you think that first part sounds bad, wait until you hear what happened when the police arrived. And trust me, this story only gets wilder from there. So let's rewind and paint the full picture. Davis isn't just anybody. He's a decorated police commander, known in his department for being fair but firm. A man who climbed the ranks through years of service, often carrying the heavy burden of being one of the few black men in leadership. He's respected, but he's also familiar with the weight of being judged before he even speaks. On this day, Davis was just off duty doing something simple, buying groceries. He walked into the local store, nodded politely to people, grabbed the essentials: bread, milk, vegetables, maybe some meat for dinner. Nothing unusual. On his way home, he thought about his family. Maybe his daughter had homework he'd help with. Maybe his wife was waiting for him to start cooking. It was an ordinary moment that should have stayed ordinary. But ordinary doesn't always stay that way. As Davis walked past one particular house, a teenage boy stepped outside. Let's call him Ryan. Ryan wasn't just curious. He felt bold, entitled. Maybe he'd grown up thinking his family had authority in the neighborhood because his mom was on the HOA board. Maybe he thought he could get away with saying whatever came to his mind. So he looked at Davis's grocery bags and without hesitation demanded some food. "Give me some of that," he said, pointing at the bags. No greeting, no joke, just pure arrogance. Davis stopped, confused. Who was this kid? Why was he talking like that? He calmly replied, "No, these are mine, I bought them." He kept walking, not wanting to turn it into a confrontation. But to Ryan, being told no wasn't something he was used to. He turned red with embarrassment and stormed back inside to get his mother. Now here, where Linda enters. Linda was the type of person who carried herself like she owned the entire block. Being on the HOA board gave her a taste of power, and she never missed a chance to flex it. To her, everyone else was beneath her, especially someone who didn't fit her narrow image of who belonged in the neighborhood. Ryan ran in and spun the story. "Mom, that man threatened me." He twisted the truth, painting himself as the victim. Linda didn't ask questions. She didn't step back to consider that maybe her son was exaggerating. No, she charged out of the house like she was storming a battlefield. She marched straight toward Davis, who was still walking toward his home. She demanded to know what he'd said to her son. Her tone wasn't curious, it was accusatory. "Why are you threatening my child? Why are you even here?" Davis, still calm, tried to explain. "Ma'am, your son came up to me and demanded my groceries. I told him no, that's all." But Linda wasn't listening. To her, Davis wasn't a neighbor with groceries. He was a threat, not because of what he did, but because of who he was. And so, without hesitation, she pulled out her phone. She told the dispatcher there was a suspicious man in her neighborhood, that he'd threatened her son, that she felt unsafe. And in that one call, she tried to summon the full force of the law against an innocent man. Now pause for a moment, because this is where the reality of race in America comes into sharp focus. For a black man, a call to 911 isn't just inconvenient. It can be deadly. Time and time again, we've seen situations where someone's bias turns into a false report, and the outcome is tragic. Names like John Crawford, Tamir Rice, and so many others remind us how dangerous it is when lies are mixed with prejudice and police involvement. But here, where Linda's plan unraveled. Because Davis wasn't just any black man, he was Commander Davis, and the cops she thought she was summoning against him, they were his colleagues. Some of them were even his subordinates. Minutes later, a patrol car rolled up. Two officers stepped out, expecting to deal with some kind of disturbance. They saw Linda waving her arms, her son at her side, pointing toward Davis like he was a criminal. "He threatened my boy," Linda shouted. "He's dangerous." The officers walked over, ready to listen. But then Davis set his bags down, reached calmly into his pocket and pulled out his badge. Commander Davis, badge number 247. The air shifted instantly. The officers froze. They knew exactly who he was. This wasn't just some guy on the street. This was their superior, a man who outranked them by miles. The respect was immediate. And Linda's face, it must have been priceless. The certainty she carried, the smug belief that she was in control, cracked right there on the sidewalk. The officers turned to her now. "Ma'am, what exactly happened here?" Linda stammered. She repeated her story, but now it sounded weaker. He scared my son. He was aggressive." But Davis's calm explanation cut through her lies. He told the truth plainly. Her son demanded his groceries. He refused, and then she tried to twist the situation by calling the police. And the officers believed him, not just because of his badge, but because his demeanor told the whole story. Linda realized she had backed herself into a corner. The very people she thought she could weaponize were now looking at her as the problem. Her credibility evaporated. And if you think that moment ended it, just wait. Because the fallout didn't stop on the sidewalk. The next day, Davis walked into his office at the station, and word of what happened had already spread. And what came next was even more explosive. By the next morning, everyone in the department had heard about what happened. Stories travel fast in law enforcement, especially when it involves one of their leaders. Officers were talking about how a woman tried to call the cops on their commander. Some were laughing at the absurdity. Others were angry because they understood the deeper truth. If Davis hadn't been who he was, that call could have gone very differently. And Davis knew it too. He'd spent years carrying the invisible weight of being a black officer in America. Even with a badge, even with rank, he knew he wasn't immune to bias. This incident proved it again. His authority saved him, but what about everyone else who doesn't wear a uniform? Now here, where the story connects to a bigger picture. Because Linda wasn't the first to weaponize 911 like this, and she wouldn't be the last. Remember the Central Park birdwatching case? A black man named Christian Cooper asked a woman to leash her dog, as park rules required. Instead of complying, she called 911 and claimed an African-American man was threatening her. The video of that incident went viral, exposing how a simple lie could have put Cooper's life at risk. Or think about Barbecue Becky, the woman who called the police on black families having a barbecue in a public park. Or the woman dubbed Permit Patty, who called the cops on an 8-year-old black girl selling water. Each of these cases highlights the same ugly truth. Some people feel entitled to use the police as their personal enforcers, especially against black people. What Linda did was part of that same pattern. The only difference was that her target wasn't powerless. He had rank, he had authority, and he had the ability to turn her weapon back on her. Let's step into Davis's mind for a moment. Imagine standing there, hearing her lies, watching officers approach. Even with his badge in his pocket, he must have felt that familiar knot in his stomach. The fear that comes from knowing one false move, one misunderstanding, could flip everything upside down. For Davis, this wasn't just about groceries. It was about dignity, about the endless cycle of being judged, doubted, accused, even when you've done nothing wrong. He worked his whole career to prove himself, to protect his community, and yet in that moment, all of it could have been erased by one phone call. And here's the part that makes the story so powerful. When he revealed who he was, it wasn't just about saving himself. It was about holding up a mirror to Linda and everyone like her, showing them how quickly their assumptions collapse when faced with the truth. This wasn't just about groceries. It wasn't just about one HOA Karen. It was about the bigger reality that so many people face, the weaponization of fear, the misuse of police power, and the danger of prejudice. Linda thought she had the upper hand, but in the end, her actions exposed her bias, her entitlement, and the cracks in the system. For Davis, the story ended with him safe, his dignity intact. But for countless others, the outcome hasn't been the same. And that's why these stories matter, because they shine a light on what's real. The morning after the incident, Davis woke up early. He wasn't the kind of man who let drama weigh him down. But as he sat at his kitchen table, sipping coffee, he knew the story wasn't over. His phone buzzed nonstop. Calls from fellow officers, text messages from colleagues. Word had spread through the department like wildfire. The commander himself had been the target of a bogus 911 call. When he arrived at the station, the atmosphere was different. Some officers gave him nods of respect, as if to say, "We heard, we stand with you." Others avoided eye contact, uncomfortable with what the incident revealed, because for them it wasn't just about Davis. It was a mirror reflecting something bigger, how quickly bias could twist the truth. And here's the part Linda never thought about. Once you call the police on someone powerful, you can't control the fallout. Davis wasn't interested in revenge, but the community was buzzing. Neighbors whispered. Other HOA members started questioning Linda's behavior. If she could lie about a police commander, what else had she lied about? Later that week, Davis was called into a meeting with the chief of police. It wasn't disciplinary, far from it. The chief wanted to hear every detail straight from Davis. The two sat in a quiet office, blinds drawn, the weight of the situation heavy in the air. "So she really called you in for groceries?" the chief asked, half in disbelief, half in anger. Davis nodded. "Yes, sir," said, "I threatened her son, all because I told him no when he demanded food from my bags." The chief sighed. He knew this wasn't just some neighborhood dispute. It was a symptom of something deeper, and it raised uncomfortable questions. If Davis hadn't been who he was, how would the officers have responded? Would they have trusted Linda's words without question? Would Davis have ended up cuffed on his own street? The chief leaned back in his chair. "We've got to talk about this. Not just what happened to you, but what it means for the community, for the department. People need to understand the danger of false calls." Davis agreed. And that's when the incident began to shift from a personal slight into something larger, a case study in prejudice, privilege, and policing. Meanwhile, Linda's confidence was crumbling. At first, she thought she could spin the story. She told neighbors Davis had overreacted, that she was just protecting her son. But the truth was leaking out faster than she could contain it. The officers had gone back and told their colleagues what really happened. People on the block started whispering, wondering why she would make such a reckless call. The HOA board was especially shaken. Linda had built her reputation as someone who kept the neighborhood safe and organized. But now, her behavior looked reckless, even dangerous. One member pulled her aside and asked flatly, "Why would you call the police over groceries? Don't you see how that makes us look?" Linda brushed it off, but deep down, panic grew. She hadn't just embarrassed herself. She had exposed the entire HOA to scrutiny. And for people who thrive on control, exposure is the worst punishment. Here, where the story zooms out. Because what Linda did isn't rare. In fact, it's part of a long, ugly history of false accusations being used as weapons. From the days of Jim Crow to modern times, black men and women have been endangered by lies. Think about Emmett Till, a 14-year-old boy accused falsely of offending a white woman in 1955. That lie cost him his life. Decades later, Carolyn Bryant, the woman who accused him, admitted the story wasn't true, yet the damage was already done. Generations scarred by one false accusation. Now fast forward to today. While the stakes might look different, the root problem is the same. When someone uses lies and police intervention as a weapon, they're gambling with another person's life. Linda's phone call echoed that history, whether she realized it or not. Davis knew this. That's why he wasn't just thinking about himself. He was thinking about every young black man in that neighborhood who might not have a badge to protect them. Because if Linda could lie about him, what would stop her from lying about someone else? It didn't take long for the story to reach local journalists. An anonymous tip had been sent to a reporter, highlighting the irony of a police commander being falsely accused in his own neighborhood. The reporter called Davis for comment. At first, he hesitated. Going public wasn't his style. He valued privacy. But then he thought about the impact. If I don't say something, he told himself, this just becomes another whisper, another quiet injustice swept under the rug. So he spoke. He didn't name Linda, but he told the story plainly. A woman in his neighborhood had made a false 911 call, accusing him of threatening her son, when all he had done was protect his groceries. He talked about the danger of weaponized calls, about how this time he was safe, but others might not be. The article hit the local paper and spread online. People shared it, commented on it, debated it. Some were shocked. Others weren't surprised at all. And soon, it wasn't just a local story. Larger outlets picked it up, framing it as yet another example of the Karen phenomenon colliding with race and power. But here's the part no one saw coming. Linda wasn't done. Public shame made her defensive. Instead of apologizing, she doubled down. She started telling anyone who would listen that Davis was using his position to bully her, that he was ruining her reputation. She even hinted she might take legal action. But she had no idea what was coming next, because the HOA, tired of her antics, was about to turn on her. And when they did, Linda would find herself isolated in the very community she once controlled. And if you thought calling the cops on a police commander was bad, wait until you see how she tried to fight back when the entire neighborhood stopped believing her. You won't believe how far she went. To be continued in Part 2.